So I started maybe a minute later than I would like to have, but I have finally gotten started. I don't know how to go about this. I mean, I have a Facebook Live video going. I also have a YouTube video going. But I feel like my main focus is the creation of a YouTube video rather than a Facebook video. Just to get that out of the way, what would I like to say? What should I say before I begin? Well, I did type up a description. All right. So, my live video has officially began. I have started the YouTube video as well. That's where I'm at right now. So where do I begin? What should I say for myself? This video, it is about me reading aloud and what I read aloud, I should have something to say. It's also about consistency. It was It was over 10 days ago that I had opened the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality. And when I did that, I had read only so far, and I just had maybe another paragraph to go. And I had started scratching my table, and I remember that I was trying to associate fictionality, or trying to, I guess, compare and contrast reality and fictionality. The reality of fiction, as I am a person who's sitting here, has started these two videos, and what I intend to do is read and speak, but there isn't much that I can say. You know, I'm not here to talk about my day, which I didn't have a bad day. I mean, I could talk about my day, but that isn't what I'm trying to do. Because I'm trying to, at this moment, create a part of my day. The end of my day is what I'm trying to have right here. So I said that what I might do is read my description for the video, and let me go ahead and do that. If I can find it, there it is. I say that over a week ago, I opened the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality, reading the preface. For the most part, I want to be using my voice to read aloud. not only reading aloud, but saying something for myself. For now, I think it something I do not enough, that I should try to do more, exercising my voice, doing things intentionally, with metacognition in mind. What does the material make me think? If at all the material makes me think, what can I say, or will I say anything? With many things in life, there's intentionality and actuality, that is, reality. So much of intent, for some of us, to some degree aware, is of the way in which time is spent. Reading more than talking, probably. At one point, I may read this description. Reading isn't the most creative of things to do. There should be more to it than what I put into it for it to be creative. But that I've thought to do it is creative as it gets for me. Roughly going over a piece of information. I also had a chat with ChatGPT about a couple of things. I'll share that conversation. Also a clip from BBC Radio 4, Free Thinking on Uncertainty. Learning to talk. Now, I may not get around to sharing that clip because for some reason I didn't think to send it to myself. I mean, I do have access to BBC Radio 4, but once I have access to the BBC Sounds app, but once I get in there, I'll have to search for that part of it. It's something I was thinking about doing earlier, was sharing that piece of information in maybe a reel, but then I started sharing my own reels and didn't get around to sharing the BBC reel. But I guess what I could do is read some more about informality, and I'll share this ChatGPT conversation I had. What I had said to ChatGPT was, so I'm looking up a few things on Google because I'm reading in the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality one of the opening sections titled "The Raison d'être of Informality Studies and Introduction." In it, there are terms like cross-disciplinary and hyper-specialization. Through Google, I found a couple of articles, but I'd like to check with you about writing an article for me to read. I want to add human error into all of this, but am not trying to write it out myself. There's a part of what I'm reading in the section. It says, focusing on what works rather than what should work, or the reasons why public policies do not work. And the Global Encyclopedia of Informality is really neat. And when you think about the content you may view or the news that you may take in or what's going on in politics, and you know, the informal that you bring to it is, or that you can bring into anything, is that you are new to it, or that you know nothing about it, that your normality is informal to someone else's normality. What others think is normal, what others have formalized, we are informal in it. And I've been trying to, or, you know, I cannot help but to think that way guess since reading this, it's become more clear. I mean, we all have our own, the way we feel, and when you feel you've found something that understands how you feel, or something that's so out in the open about, not acting some type of way, like, being the real, true self, whatever that is for you, given a situation, not acting like someone you're not. In some sense, I like to think that be yourself cannot be, but that is me discrediting myself. I don't like to give myself too much credit because of the year it is, the age we are, the age I was, or the year it is, the age we are, the year I was born, and what has been set in place before I was born. Not 20 or 40 years before I was born, and you get a feel for what, I'm 35 right now. You get a feel for what happens in 35 years. You come to realize what a realization is, instead of hearing people say that you are going to one day realize. You actually do. You actualize realization in your life after you've lived so long. Once you're early in life educated, you start to become educated because you are being educated, you are learning. You are learning and you are, what do? You are learning and unlearning as you go through life. I mean, that's the way I look at it, at least. That's what I feel like I have realized. That's what's happened, is that you are learning and you are unlearning as you go through life, like nouns and verbs and adverbs, nouns, verbs, adverbs, pronouns. How do we use those terms? Are those terms only for teachers? And how can we relate to those terms, especially because a noun is a person, place, or thing. And there are so many things that we can talk about when we use the word noun. But are we talking about creative writing? Or are we talking about freedom of speech? And if we talk about freedom of speech, what does that mean? What is it to talk about freedom of speech? I mean, there are so many things we can see that are given to us. So, to speak, that's the way I find that I've used, so to speak. Whatever I can read, I've given myself to say, so to speak. Like I just read that, what I said to ChatGPT, and now I've responded to what I have said in a way, a video type of way, but I'm not typing, I'm not texting, I'm saying what comes to mind. And then I'm talking about the fact that I'm saying, which, that is kind of informal, right? Because I'm not well practiced at this making of YouTube videos, but I'm learning. And I am or have been practicing reading aloud. I've been practicing camera presence. I've been practicing how long it takes for a video to upload, how long I can sort of sit still. What happens when you read something? You might want to respond, and if you don't have a person, a physical person to respond to, or if you don't have someone who's interested in the subject that you're interested in, searching for someone or saying something about what you're reading, letting yourself respond anyway is what social media does for us. I can show someone something, but more than likely, if I show someone what I'm into here, according to the setting, or situation, like this is not something I want to be doing at work. Obviously, I am not at work at the moment. I'm spending what free time I have doing this. Being present. Intending to do the sharing of a video. Now, I'm getting into things that I don't need to be saying. But there are also words that I don't want to be using, and so I need to be saying these things that I don't need to be saying. I need to get more on topic, get more on point. So let me tell you, I shared the entire piece of the section that I was talking to ChatGPT about in that same message. It was a very long message I sent to ChatGPT because ChatGPT can write an article for you, and ChatGPT will read aloud an article for you as well. And I may talk a little robotic, but I'm trying to articulate and enunciate my words in a casual way. I want my articulation to be casual. And in order to do that, I need to practice talking. I need to practice talking instead of reading. And that being what I have to say, it's a little awkward. And there was a mumble right there, a little awkward. I may need to speak a little slower. I want to be able to catch myself before I say the words, or before I start going, I was thinking earlier about the word it and the word something. I don't want to be saying the word something. In order for me to actually say something, I don't want to be using something. And instead of the word it, I should let there be something it is. It's difficult for me not to use those words, but I know why I don't want to use those words. It's just like trying to say something without using I would like to say. I think about using I would like to say. But what we are supposed to do, I don't know why I feel this way, why I feel like this is what I need to communicate. But I'm trying to think about why it is, or how to articulate why it is a person should not say, I would like to say, but why a person might want to use, I would like to say. There's nothing wrong with letting it be known what you would like to say, but there is also nothing wrong with communicating what you would like to say or thinking about what you would like to say. Like if there is something that you would like to say, it should be something that you have just said instead of saying, I would like to say. But I don't understand why I have to think that way. I need to think about not doing that, and it's frustrating. Anyway, very informal is the way I'm doing this video. It's already 20 minutes in. It's telling me my keyframe rate is too low, but I'm going on with it anyway. And this video should be fine, and maybe I'll be able to post it on Facebook. I don't know. Let me read that entire piece of the section, which is a summary of the volume that I put into ChatGPT, and then I'll read what ChatGPT has said to me. We had a little conversation. Along with the first 2 volumes of the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality, it sets the boundaries, rules, and standards of what is shaping up to be the field of informality studies. These standards include a cross-disciplinary approach which combines approaches and insights into political sciences, sociology, social anthropology, social psychology, organizational theory, behavioral economics, and other disciplines. The network expertise, which is a response to the problem produced by the contradictory tendencies of the growing volume and complexity of knowledge on the one hand, and scholars' hyper-specialization and the fragmentation of academic knowledge on the other. A bottom-up perspective that gives voice to the witnesses of informal practices in local contexts. The means of identification of informal practices, which often escape articulation in official discourse, but must have a name in the local jargon, focusing on what works rather than what should work or the reasons why public policies do not work. Context-sensitive comparisons of similar informal practices from various parts of the world, which provide a generalization of knowledge without losing sight of the local context, and keeping in mind the ambivalence of informal practices, their substantive, functional, normative, and motivational ambivalence. ChatGPT responds, "Got it. You're reading about informality studies, particularly how it's developing as a field and defining its standards. You want an article that incorporates human error into this framework, particularly in relation to hyperspecialization, cross-disciplinarity, and the focus on what works rather than theoretical idealism. Here's a possible article for you. The role of human error in informality studies, a necessary variable in a cross-disciplinary approach. The study of informality has taken shape as an interdisciplinary effort integrating insights from political science, sociology, anthropology, psychology, organizational theory, and economics. This approach allows for a more holistic understanding of informal practices, those social behaviors and networks that operate outside formal institutions, yet shape governance, economies, and communities worldwide. However, one crucial, often overlooked factor in this analysis is human error. Hyperspecialization in academia has led to an increasing fragmentation of knowledge, where experts become deeply entrenched in a narrow domains. While this has advantages in developing depth, it also creates blind spots. Scholars may be unable to fully grasp how their field connects with broader societal mechanisms. This is where informality studies, with its cross-disciplinary approach, attempts to bridge gaps. But what happens when human error, both in expertise and in informal practices themselves, enters the equation? Human error as an informal variable. Most informal policies and institutional frameworks assume a rational actor model where decisions are made logically and efficiently. Informality studies challenge this by focusing on what actually works rather than what should work. However, human error disrupts both formal and informal processes. Mistakes in judgment, miscommunication, and cognitive biases all shape how informal networks function. Consider the example of informal economies. Street vendors, for instance, rely on informal rules of conduct, shared understandings, and tacit agreements. But human error, miscalculating supply, misreading customer behavior, or even misplacing goods, affects their decision-making. Unlike formal institutions, where errors can be documented and corrected through structured feedback loops, informal systems rely on adaptability and social trust to mitigate mistakes. Hyperspecialization and the limits of error recognition. Hyperspecialization exacerbates the risk of overlooking human error because experts, while highly knowledgeable in their field, may lack the contextual understanding necessary to recognize and correct for mistakes that occur outside their domain. An economist analyzing informal lending practices may not fully grasp the social and psychological factors that influence borrowers' trust networks. A political scientist studying informal governance may not account for the economic motivations of participants. This limitation means that informality studies, while seeking to integrate multiple disciplines, must also confront the reality that no single perspective can fully capture the complexity of human error. A cross-disciplinary approach should not just merge fields, but actively work against the intellectual siloing that prevents experts from seeing the unintended consequences of their own assumptions. Learning from what works despite error. One of the central tenets of informality studies is its focus on what works, rather than idealized policy models. This principle, when applied to human error, suggests that informal systems are often resilient precisely because they acknowledge and adapt to error rather than eliminating it entirely. For instance, informal labor markets, such as day laborers who gather at street corners, function despite the unpredictability of daily work availability, employer reliability, and fluctuating wages. While formal labor policies may fail due to rigid regulations and bureaucratic inefficiencies, these informal networks adjust dynamically to errors such as an employer failing to show up or a worker misunderstanding a job requirement. This adaptability offers a crucial lesson. Policymaking and academic analysis should not seek perfection, but rather understand how societies accommodate and even utilize human error to maintain functionality. Conclusion: human error as a feature, not a bug. Informality studies highlight the gap between formal policies and real-world practices. Integrating human error into this analysis means recognizing that mistakes are not just accidental disruptions, but fundamental components of informal systems. Cross-disciplinary collaboration must include an awareness of how different fields conceptualize and correct for human error, while hyperspecialization should be counterbalanced with interdisciplinary dialogue. By focusing on what works, including how people compensate for their own mistakes, informality studies can offer a deeper, more realistic insight into human behavior. Rather than treating human error as a flaw in informal systems, it should be seen as a driving force behind their adaptability and resilience. And then ChatGPT says, would this be the kind of thing you're looking for? Let me know if you want any adjustments. I said, I'm not sure. Right now in the news, there's talks of shutting down government departments and slashing DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion programs, and firing personnel who highlight the skill of study or certification. That's what I got from that, or what I got from the news, I think. I think that's what I heard, anyway. There was a notification. I wanted to make sure my video was still going. Anyway, ChatGPT says that's an interesting angle to consider in relation to informality studies, human error, and hyperspecialization. If government departments are shut down or DEI programs are eliminated, it means informal structures that once legitimized expertise and specialization are being devalued or dismantled. This could lead to more resilience on informal systems, or more reliance on informal systems, whether that's informal hiring networks, alternative education pathways, or adaptive social practices. If people are fired for emphasizing certification or expertise, it suggests a shift away from institutional validation of knowledge. This could increase reliance on experience-based learning, peer networks, and bottom-up skill sharing, elements that align with the informal structures described in the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality. However, this also raises concerns. Does removing formal expertise create gaps that informal systems can't fully fill? Could human error become a larger problem when specialized knowledge is dismissed as unnecessary? Would you like me to incorporate this political and economic shift into the article? I could explore how reducing formal institutions forces societies to lean more on informal mechanisms, both in governance and workforce adaptation. I said, the president has been highlighting common sense. I believe DEI is one of those things for government departments, even Americanism, that does require a certain common sense. To me, there's even a beautification of informality happening in America, as if the previous president, delivering remarks, so to speak, on an inflection point we've reached or are reaching, is one that, with liberty and justice for all in mind, we're going to have to find new ways of formalization. I say going to have. It's a must. It's like a must that we have. So it's just, we can't just force people to do what needs to be done, because we need people to realize what they need to do. So then ChatGPT is always saying nice things when you say something to it. It says, that's a really sharp observation. The idea that informality is not just something that happens outside of formal systems, but is being actively embraced as a cultural and political shift. If formal structures like DEI programs or bureaucratic departments are being dismantled, then what emerges in their place isn't just a vacuum. It's a reconfiguration of how legitimacy, expertise, and organization function. Common sense, as the president has emphasized, is often positioned as an antidote to overspecialization or bureaucratic inefficiency. But common sense itself isn't necessarily a fixed or universal thing. It's shaped by context, culture, and power dynamics. What one administration sees as common sense, another might see as short-sighted or regressive. This is where your idea of beautification of informality becomes really interesting. If we're at an inflection point, it might not just be about reducing formal structures, but about redefining what counts as formal. Informality studies already point to the way informal systems step in when formal ones fail. But what happens when informality itself becomes a kind of official doctrine? Are we witnessing the emergence of a new form of governance that relies less on institutional oversight and more on decentralized, adaptive, and informal mechanisms? Maybe the challenge isn't just finding new ways of formalization, it's recognizing that the boundary between formal and informal is shifting. Instead of thinking of informality as something that fills the gaps left by weakened institutions, we might be seeing a moment where informal logic becomes the new institutional standard. Do you want an article exploring that direction? How informality is being formalized in American political and social life? I could connect it to historical shifts in governance, economy, and even cultural movements that have legitimized informal practices over time. I just said sure. I guess I should be more insightful with my responses, but I want to see what ChatGPT does with. Of course, I want to see what ChatGPT says to me without me saying much to it. Because I don't have a lot of information to put in there. If I didn't think to say anything, I just said, sure, that's what it gets. And then this is what it gives me. The formalization of informality. America's shift toward common sense governance. Introduction. The rise of informality as a political value. In recent years, a shift has taken place in American governance and public policy, one that leans away from rigid bureaucratic structures and toward a more flexible, informal approach, whether it's the push to dismantle government departments, the reduction of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, or the broader emphasis on common sense over expert-driven specialization. We are witnessing a moment in which informality itself is being rebranded as a guiding principle. But informality has traditionally been understood as what happens outside of formal institutions, street economies, community-led justice systems, handshake deals in business. What does it mean when informal thinking is deliberately incorporated into government and policy? Are we seeing the emergence of a new kind of formalization? One that doesn't rely on traditional markers of legitimacy like expertise, certification, or bureaucratic oversight? Common sense as a mode of governance. The appeal of common sense governance is its promise of simplicity. It suggests that government should be more intuitive, responsive, and less entangled in procedural complexity. The current administration's emphasis on common sense echoes populist sentiments that distrust elite knowledge and prioritize practical, everyday decision-making. However, common sense is not an objective standard. It's a product of social conditioning, cultural narratives, and historical precedents. What is seen as common sense in one era might be considered outdated in another. The Civil Rights Act, for example, was once fiercely resisted by those who framed racial segregation as a common sense social order. Likewise, DEI programs were initially introduced as a corrective to systemic exclusion. But their recent rollback is justified by a different interpretation of what is practical, necessary, or fair. The beautification of informality in America. Informality has often been associated with survival, people working around rigid or inaccessible systems to make things function in their communities. Yet today, there's a new aesthetic to informality, a beautification of it. We see this in the glorification of alternative paths to success, self-taught entrepreneurs, influencers, independent content creators, the rejection of credentialism, and the rise of informal political movements that reject traditional party structures. This shift suggests that America is not just relying on informal mechanisms due to institutional failures, but is celebrating informality as a cultural and political virtue. In this framing, traditional institutions, universities, government agencies, corporate HR departments are seen as outdated obstacles rather than necessary structures. However, this beautification has risks. Informal systems, while adaptive, can also be exclusive, inconsistent, and dependent on personal relationships rather than transparent rules. The weakening of formal oversight in favor of informal flexibility can lead to inequalities, as those with stronger networks or historical advantages will navigate informal structures more successfully than those without them. New paths to formalization. If informality is becoming a dominant mode of operation, the next challenge is figuring out how to formalize it without losing its adaptability. The United States has historically gone through cycles of informal to formal transitions. Early labor movements started as informal worker networks before becoming formalized into unions. The internet began as a free-flowing, unregulated space before government and corporate entities introduced structured oversight. Social justice movements, often dismissed as grassroots disruptions, have historically influenced formal legal changes. The question today is, what structures will emerge from this current wave of informal thinking? If DEI initiatives are being reduced in government, will new informal diversity networks take their place? If bureaucratic departments are shutting down, will decentralized governance models like state-level policies or private sector-led initiatives take on their roles? Conclusion. The informal future of America. The inflection point we're at isn't just about reducing government. It's about redefining structure and authority function in American life. Informality is no longer just a gap filler for failing institutions. It is being woven into the fabric of governance itself. But informality alone is not a stable foundation. If it is to be a lasting feature of policy and culture, it must find ways to balance adaptability with fairness, efficiency with accountability. As the nation moves forward with liberty and justice for all in mind, the challenge will be ensuring that informal approaches to governance don't simply benefit those already positioned to navigate them. Finding new ways of formalization will require understanding that informality is not just a breakdown of old systems, it's the beginning of new ones. And then ChatGPT goes on to say, how's that? I tried to tie in your themes of common sense, the beautification of informality, and the need to find new ways of structuring governance. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments. I feel like instead of make adjustments, I should try to update ChatGPT in this conversation because you can have multiple conversations with ChatGPT at one time. You can have so many different things going on. But I feel like I should let it know that that the government is trying to talk about state-level policies, but that's something that I don't exactly agree with. I like there to be a national formalization. I like to think that there is a national formalization that's possible rather than a state-based thing. But I can understand why it's good to have a state-based thing. It's just that I don't like that because each state is so different. Like, I want there to be a national thing because stately, everything is so informally country. And I'm not trying to say that people are lazy or anything, and I'm not trying to say that, people don't know what to do, because people know what they are doing is part of what's happening. And we all know what we're doing. We know what our job is. There are scheduling issues and communication errors that are just our way of doing things. Societally, the nation is of United States. Each state is different, and there is no changing that for now, at least. But we need to unify, I believe, the United States. Just because our name is the United States, it doesn't mean we are unified. You can, only a few miles apart is a world of difference here in the United States. We are the United States, but we are in the United States. Each state is divided into counties and cities. Of course, state is bigger than city and county, but we need a national outlook to be what everyone is. We need a more national outlook, like a more informal national outlook. But we need to know that the informal national outlook is under a formalized structure, and that the formalized structure is over the informal. It's just something that we need to know. It's the human condition, not human error. It's part of human being. We need to know that there is an authority. We need to know that there is an authority, and we can't help that. We need to know what to do, or what we are allowed to do within what to do. And it's frustrating to have to learn based on these structures, because we are suffering from a structural what was that? Structural a structural no, we're having structural problems. Everything is so well structured. Like what is good and what is bad are both evil. Like you have the word evil, and then you could do like in school, you have the word evil, and then you could branch off, put good here and bad here, and that is what evil is. You have evil, and you have good, and you have bad. That's how evil, good, bad. So that was cool. Now let me see if I can find that BBC free thinking episode. BBC has so much going on BBC Sounds, and I mean, you think when you hear BBC, you think UK, and that it's going to be all about UK things, but it's totally not. It's crazy how much they talk about history and where things come from, and just how they talk about things of science in history. It's wonderful, really, and it's free. It's crazy that BBC is something free. Like, I'm baffled at all the stuff they have, but it's like there's a lot of options. When you have so many options, it's hard to choose, and I'm sure they're aware of that. Like, how are you going to go over everything in our app? How are you going to go over everything in our application? Would you please check it from time to time and see if there's something you might want to look at? There's no way you're going to go over all of it. It's updated extensively, almost daily. And very informational and thought-provoking. Almost no matter where you look. So you can deal with the thoughts you're having on what information is. And that's what you get. Funny. Well, thanks. Thanks for that. Let's see if I can find that.
Hello, BBC Radio Thoughts. Time for Free Thinking with Amber Kelford.
Thanks, Chris. The stuff
To Western Europe, a huge market on its doorstep.
of capitalistic kind of extraction in London.
Is that we couldn't do it if we had the political will. Simply discussed.
Yeah, and also, frankly, I was really trying to set you both up for a protest as such. Is of course,
Let me say,
go on.
I obviously watch these extremely closely. Europe borrows hundreds of
Positive and think that the world is still has great examples of
And so it's not a physics problem, it's an economics problem. Has kept going. It's not been universal here.
without a more, if you like, creative way of thinking about the world, extraordinary, particularly still passing through.
Western Europe.
I would never use the word never right now. Take that bet. We ran for 10, 30 years' time still arguing about it. Margaret, listening to what you heard Victoria saying there and the debate that it's very easy to, and you'll put it very well as well, which is to remind us that it's not just the desiccated calculating machines or the big meetings or the big breakups in the White House. There is a creativity that flows through societies under most extraordinary stress.
Well, and of course it's the one thing that people remember. It's the one thing that lasts of our various civilizations, is the creativity and the imagination to think of what was never there before. And I think that increasingly, without a more, if you like, creative way of thinking about the world, we are going to find ourselves skewered on these very harsh, brutal binaries, when in fact more imaginative thinking about the politics and about the economics, less ideological thinking, exploring the spaces between, is going to get us a lot further.
You're listening to Free Thinking on Radio 4. I'm Anne McElvoy. My guests are talking about uncertainty and the world all around us, which has plenty of it, with CEO and philosopher Margaret Heffernan, you just heard there, historian Timothy Garton-Ash, astrophysicist Chris Lintott, and Telegraph columnist and economist Liam Halligan. And you've also just heard from Ukraine expert Professor Victoria Donovan. Let's shift gear now, or indeed slip the surly bands of earth with Chris Lintott. I've just been talking about that. Chris, the uncertainty that we've reflected on is obviously something that you can relate to in terms of your field. But how do you see it then in terms of cooperation? If you want to be a bit more positive and think that the world still has great examples of cooperation. We've been focusing in the news and in our debate on conflict. But tell me where you see perhaps something a bit more upbeat.
Yes, well, we're used to working together in space, well, in all of science, but particularly in the exploration of the cosmos, the European Space Agency, which brings together 20 or so countries to do things together. But I think there's an extraordinary story that will come out of these last few years from the International Space Station, which flies above our heads about 100 miles up. You can go and wave at it as it goes past.
My goodness, I cannot remember where it was that she starts talking about education.
But it's, of course, a Russian, European, Japanese, American station that has functioned throughout the last few years seamlessly. So you have mission control in Moscow handing over to mission control in Houston without a glitch. You have astronauts sharing air and water. I'm told the Americans have the best food, the Japanese have the best gadgets, the Russians have the most fun, and the Europeans have the coffee. So, this becomes a very international thing. And I do think there's a story there of how that, of all things, has kept going. Now, it's not been universal. The European Space Agency's taken the step to break down collaboration with Russia. There's a Mars rover that's got UK built instruments that's very delayed because we're trying to find another rocket for it, and so on. But I do think there's something about looking up at the space station and waving at it and realising that at least is something that's together. Maybe that's a little utopia, but it is there and you can see it.
It's quite nice to have something a bit forward, looking in a good way at the moment. Something that caught my eye there, which I think you know something about, which was new to me, was the mining of minerals on asteroids. Just as a theme, as we've been, now we will become instant experts on whether or not there should be a deal on critical minerals in Ukraine, but maybe we were looking in the wrong place.
Well, there are the asteroid belt and the nearest asteroids that threaten us are remarkably rich sources of things like lithium, platinum, all sorts of rare earth metals. And at some point, we should go and get them. They don't have...
But can you steer asteroids?
You can steer asteroids.
So they can land safely in the sea or
I think you want them in Earth
desert or something.
You want them in Earth orbit. You use what's called a gravity tractor, where you go and put a rocket
It's been
that
quite
fly
fun.
alongside. Yeah, well, you match the orbit, and then if you can spot the asteroid early enough, a small adjustment, if you're careful.
Touch on it.
So these are the same techniques that we'd use to defend ourselves against an asteroid. There's some fun economics, though, as well. So I really love the idea. No, not just calculating machines. If you took, there's asteroids that are so rich in platinum that they'd make you the richest person on earth if you could go and get one and bring it back. But the moment you did, you'd have so much platinum, the price would crash. And so it's not a physics problem, it's an economics problem. So I've got the
classic uncertainty problem.
That's right, exactly. So I've got the easy bit. On uncertainty, though, while we're talking about throwing stuff around the solar system, I keep coming back as we have this conversation to a man I met just after the Juno spacecraft went into orbit around Jupiter. I was at mission control to watch it. It was wonderful. And the next morning, I ran into the engineer who's in charge of the mission. I said, "How's it going?" He said, "Everything is consistent with being perfect." Which I think, if we're calling for quantifying uncertainty, I think he's our patron saint.
Yeah, I was going to ask for that in my performance review. Thank you very, very much. But Tim, I just wondered, there is this sort of, you see, we've all the mood is immediately lightened. There is something also about space. I was thinking about, the old Cold War competition for space, which in many ways was very serious and fed into, certainly, to defence and security, and often some bad intentions along the way. But there has always been something rather uplifting, as it when rivals on Earth then somehow manage to find some form of cooperation just by going up there.
Yeah, maybe it's just that there's something uplifting about scientists like Chris, because when he was talking so engagingly and enthusiastically, I was thinking of Michael Frayn's play Copenhagen. Brilliant play about that fantastic international cooperation of physicists before the Second World War. And it seemed to me that sort of captures the kind of absolutely ideal type of uncertainty, doesn't it? Which is this mixture of, intense competition and cooperation, sort of civilized conflict. It's not killing each other, but there's also lots of conflict. And so I think in a way that's what we're looking for.
Well, and I think both what both Chris and I are talking about is it's the spaces between that are worth exploring, and you find this exactly in the arts, that artists are galvanized by each other. They're also fantastic at supporting one another. One of the great stories about Picasso and Matisse is they were the only two artists that each other really cared about, because they thought, actually, those are the people I have the most to learn from. So although everyone loves to tell the competitive story, the real story is completely different. And it's that kind of mindset, I think, that we need to figure out how to make more diffused, because it's much more imaginative, it has endlessly more potential, and this deeply binary, competitive win-lose mindset is the most dangerous thing in human existence.
Chris, you've also been involved in a project which brings those who, some of us won't ever be professors of astrophysics, sad to say, but you've also brought in amateur scientists in a company called the Zooniverse.
Yes. So this is, we had an everyday problem of having too many galaxies. That's how this started. And so we put them online and asked people to help us sort through them. And two amazing things happened. One was that we found millions of people wanted to help. And when we asked them why they were taking part in this project, it was that they wanted to help. So if you've got a few minutes, these days we've diversified. You can count penguins or look at bacteria or study Mars or whatever, but it takes a few minutes. But the other thing is that people are wonderfully distractible, as I think we might have shown this evening. But people are distractible. And so what that means is when you ask people to tell you whether there are spiral arms in a galaxy, they tell you that this one looks like a penguin, or that there's a set of galaxies called the Ps that we hadn't considered. And so we found this diversity of questions that we ended up asking scientifically came from talking to millions of people online.
And this is absolutely true of human creativity, which is you routinely find hard problems being solved by people working outside their domain expertise. And what we tend to do in our institutions, and certainly in our educational system, is to put people in boxes and make them excellent at one thing, thinking that that's super efficient. Well, in uncertain conditions, efficiency is the last thing you want, because you don't know what you need.
That's right.
You need a superfluity of ideas, you need a superfluity of creativity, something that on balance our education system is not providing on any front.
Well, we have two academics, I think, in front of me. I suppose, what she thinks about that. Do you think you've ranged very widely in the book, the way that you've gone about writing it about Ukraine? Do you think that we tend to over-specialise, or there's sort of, I think there are two views of this, but one is, but you also do really have to know things, and you need to be able to go very deep, particularly given the specialism of the modern world, or are you a rover and a roamer?
Yeah, I like the idea of a trickster. So a trickster who smuggles in things from different disciplines and different sectors, and doesn't necessarily admit to it, because you're always working within quite sort of confining institutional contexts. So, Sarah Ahmed talks about hitting institutional walls and the difficulty of hitting institutional walls and trying to get through them when you're trying to do something different that the institution doesn't recognise as valuable. But you can always smuggle that in by being a trickster. So I think, I'm a big fan of kind of borderline writing, like I did in this book, and a lot of my PhDs, I'm encouraging a lot of PhD students to write like that too. That's difficult because it's not necessarily always recognised immediately as kind of institutionally valid, but I think, you smuggle it in and then the institution will get used to it.
I was going to say, I appear to be provocative. The very last bit of the programme. So if you know it's economics, I mean, everything's institutionally valid nowadays in economics, isn't it?
I think economics is in a state of flux, and I'd like to give a shout out for interdisciplinary studies. You need to develop a specialism to have something to contribute within your specialism, but also you need to roam widely.
Well, listen, we've been talking about uncertainty tonight in so many ways,
But like it was saying, it's really nice to hear them talking about it and that they are enthused by what they are talking about. That this is what they are talking about is free thinking, and our topic of discussion is uncertainty. And they put in their if you stick around and you listen throughout the conversation, that was a wonderful ending to the conversation that they just had with what they said there about interdisciplinary. I mean, that there is a need for the interdisciplinary atmosphere. It's then what are the discipline, like why is this what we need? Where are you coming from and what can you learn? What is there that you're bringing to the table is that some people are teachers and some people are learners, and that teachers need to teach and learners need to learn. But that doesn't mean that everyone's a good teacher, and that doesn't mean that everyone's a good learner. That is communication. If we talk about things, like I said earlier, using the term nouns, which are persons, places, or things, we talk about things and stuff and what the things and stuff consist of. I mean, yeah, I can say I'm on Facebook, I'm using my device, and I can say the name of it, Motorola. Both of my devices are Motorola. This is a Lenovo computer. And I have it on top of the Bible. Usually I have my Bible open, but I'm having a little trouble getting around to reading it this year. Don't ask me. I had a difficult year last year trying to read the Bible. And this year, without the format I was reading, I don't know what it is. I can't look at the Bible the same way. I cannot just read it. I don't know. Because I knew I was using an entire year to try to read it last year. Even if it was only 15 minutes a day, there's, hours throughout every day that we are using for work, and that we need to do other things that we might want to do. And making the sacrifice to read the Bible, if you want to call it that, sacrifice, it's very eye-opening. I mean, when it comes to managing your time, especially, if you want to read the Bible and make sure the Bible is all you're doing, that's all you're doing is reading it. I don't know how to explain it. I'm having a little trouble getting around to reading it this year. Because there's other things that I wanted to do before I started trying to read the Bible and trying to, figure out what's going on with Christianity these days, and what can I bring to studying the Bible, and what is there that I can, what can I bring to it? What do I think it's about? Learning not to laugh as much and taking things more seriously, my life, knowing that one day it's going to end. That's part of what the Bible is about. How is our life going to end? And we shouldn't be afraid to talk about it or think about it, but that's what we do, is not even worried about it. When you are worried about it, there's ways that you're going to cope with it. And we have, coping mechanisms, and that's part of what communication is as well. I'm not happy. I'm not mindlessly enjoying myself. I'm not mindfully enjoying myself because I don't want to seem like I'm mindlessly enjoying myself. I don't know how to enjoy myself. I do not know how. So let me finish this video before it gets too long, because I think it's been an hour and 10 minutes, my live video, and I may need to edit some off of this one because I forgot to touch the live button. It may be only a couple of minutes, but I'll have to make an edit to it. And it takes a while to edit a video. I like to do it unedited because the time it takes to edit using only the smartphone tools and then trying to upload the video, it takes a long time. I'm going to open the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality. I've already read what was that I read already? It was something called Informal Shortcuts at Informal Shortcuts at Complex Crossings, a preface. It was a preface to it. And it highlights a picture of people trying to cross a intersection, a four-way intersection, and there's people on bikes and cars and trucks and walking. Right? Well, I don't see anybody walking, but there's people on bikes and cars and mopeds, and they're all trying to get through the four-way intersection there. And it talks about the COVID-19 pandemic as a natural experiment. It's a really neat preface, and the language that this book or this encyclopedia presents is really, really nice. It talks about cross-disciplinary embrace and informality studies, overcoming fragmentation of local knowledge. And like it says up here at the top, highlights the importance of informality in human life, the natural experiment caused by the pandemic. But like I'm trying to say, these practices, I haven't went over them all, but when you read about some of them and being an American or being a United States citizen, we think of that as a car lot, is what I'm trying to say. Like, that is a used car lot there. There's a person who works at a used car lot. And there's a lot of cars. A lot of cars. There are many cars in a lot. And that is the a lot. A lot is a number of cars on a lot. There is a lot of cars. A lot doesn't mean many. It means a bunch of, I don't know. It really breaks configures your understanding of language as you know it already. So the RAISON Dietre of Informality Studies, an introduction. Now, raison d'etre of informality studies, that means the reason for being, why informality studies is. Like, raison d'etre is reason for being in French. So, raison d'etre of informality studies, an introduction. Elena Ledeneva. And there's some figures in here, little pictures. I will not go any further than this first section called the problem-oriented approach, which is only 3 pages. I said I was going to open it and look at it, and that's what I'm doing. I need to get a more formalized way of doing these videos going for myself. Rather than just practicing, I need to put into practice a formality of doing this. Anyway, the raison d'etre of informality studies. Why these informality studies are. An introduction. Elena Ledeneva, UCL, UK. The first reader of A Hitchhiker's Guide to Informal Problem Solving in Human Life. Its anonymous reviewer summed up the volume as follows, and this is what I sent to ChatGPT. Along with the first 2 volumes of the Global Encyclopaedia of Informality, sets the boundaries, rules, and standards of what is shaping up to be the field of informality studies. These standards include a cross-disciplinary approach, and cross-disciplinary is relating to or representing more than one branch of knowledge. Interdisciplinary. And interdisciplinary is relating to more than one branch of knowledge, which combines approaches and insights into political sciences, sociology, social anthropology, social psychology, organizational theory, behavioral economics, and other disciplines. The network expertise, which is a response to the problem produced by the contradictory tendencies of the growing volume and complexity of knowledge on the one hand, and scholars' hyperspecialization and the fragmentation of academic knowledge on the other. So, hyperspecialization is the process or state of breaking or being broken into small or separate parts. The fragmentation of society into a collection of interest groups. Oh, that was fragmentation, excuse me. The process or state of breaking or being broken into small or separate parts. The fragmentation of society into a collection of interest groups. And hyper-specialization, I didn't put that in there. put anything in there for hyperspecialization. I just highlighted it. That was more for me than for this. But I did put, sorry. But I did put what the definition of fragmentation, the definition of cross-disciplinary. And I defined informality too through Google. That's where I got these definitions from. Relaxed, friendly, or unofficial style or nature. Absence of formality. Formality, the rigid observance of rules, of convention or etiquette. Stiffness, so informality being relaxed, friendly, or unofficial style or nature. Absence of formality. And then formality, the rigid observance of rules or of rules of convention or etiquette. Stiffness of behavior or style, a thing that is done simply to comply with requirements of etiquette, regulations, or custom, something that is done as a matter of course and without question and inevitability. That is formality. A bottom-up perspective that gives voice to the witnesses of informal practices in local context, the means of identification of informal practices, which often escape articulation in official discourse, but must have a name in the local jargon, focusing on what works rather than what should work, or the reasons why public policies do not work. Context-sensitive comparisons of similar informal practices from various parts of the world, which provide a generalization of knowledge without losing sight of the local context and keeping in mind the ambivalence of informal practices, their substantive, functional, normative, and motivational ambivalence. I will explain why these principles are central to informality studies and why informality plays such an important role in finding solutions to 21st century problems. 1, and I'm going no further than 1, the problem-oriented approach. The rapid deployment of the internet and other digital technologies in the last 2 decades has amplified 2 conflicting trends which have been developing since the second half of the 19th century. Knowledge fragmentation and the need for integration. As the depth and complexity of knowledge has been increasing exponentially, the specialization of scholars has been increasing at a similar rate. Because of the fragmentation of academic knowledge, individual scholars are unable to tackle complex problems which require urgent solutions. One clear example of this is climate change, itself only a part of the sustainability problem, which requires a multitude of scientific perspectives as well as an understanding of societies and their foundational principle, human cooperation. In his 1948 article, Science and Complexity, Warren Weaver stated, "These new problems of complexity require science to make a third great advance, an advance that must be even greater than the 19th century conquest of problems of simplicity or the 20th century victory over problems of disorganized complexity. Science must, over the next 50 years, learn to deal with these problems of organized complexity. In order to achieve this, an open learning environment would need to be created where students could be introduced to new and innovative notions of complexity, critical thinking, data visualization and modeling, as well as the challenges of mixed methods, interdisciplinary teamwork, global complexity, and big data. In short, the social sciences would need to be opened up, as Weaver called for in 1948. And that was Castellini, 2014. Also, Byron and Callahan, 2014. So I always think when I read this that it would be nice to look up some of these things. And now and then I will look up an article or two from something that I'm reading. It's just, right now I'm expecting to go to work tomorrow. And then when I finish work, I don't know what I'm expecting to do. It's like I don't plan well enough because there's so many things that I need to be doing besides work and, still making sure that I'm going to work as well. I mean, there's not so many things. It's just I'm not sure about prioritizing sometimes. It's like, is this something I really want to do? Because it takes a lot of time. It's a little bit frustrating. I don't want to be, always charging my device. But what's the use in having a fully charged device? And yada, yada, yada. I'm getting old. I'm uneducated. I'm trying to educate myself somewhat. But there's only so much I can do besides realize what I should have already done. 3/4 of a century later, we continue to call for social sciences to develop methodologies that capture context in order to resolve the ambivalence of informal practices and map their complexity. Using mixed methods, cross-disciplinary teamwork, and institutional architecture as a means of bridging intellectual boundaries remains a challenge, even if one accepts the limitations of individual expertise. According to the cultural historian Peter Burke, historically, the challenges scattered across different fields has been addressed by individuals with encyclopedic knowledge, or polymaths, such as Da Vinci, Erasmus, Pascal, Newton, von Humboldt, Pareto, and Keynes. But deepening specialization and increasing complexity of knowledge have made them virtually impossible to overcome. Today's scholars need to collaborate and overcome the limits of specialization to reproduce a similar effect. As early as the 1920s, top-down institutional initiatives to facilitate collaboration between different fields of study led to the creation of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt and the Rockefeller Foundation Program for the Social Sciences. In the 1920s and 30s, leading U.S. universities, Yale, Harvard, Chicago, attempted to unite professors from different fields, In the social sciences, extended departments, joint seminars, and discussion groups were organized to enable collaboration and integration. In 1940, Chicago University set up a multidisciplinary committee on human development that linked natural and social sciences, a new format for interdisciplinary research under which scholars from different fields worked, conversed, and collaborated under one roof. The Institute of Advanced Studies emerged in 1931 at Princeton University. It was adopted throughout the Western world in the 1960s, mostly due to support of interdisciplinary research by Western governments in the aftermath of the Second World War. In Burke's view, in the case of humanities and social sciences, the results of these initiatives were disappointing, and many interdisciplinary research centers, interdisciplinary committees, and educational programs ceased to exist. The so-called area studies government-sponsored research collaboration initiatives continue to this day. The School of Slavonic and East European Studies in London was founded in 1915. In the aftermath of World War II, the U.S. administration, eager to learn about its rival, the USSR, joined forces with private foundations in order to establish a cross-disciplinary research. In order to establish cross-disciplinary research centers dedicated to Soviet or Russian studies. Later on, Similar institutions were created to study the Middle East, Southeast Asia, China, and Latin America, now focused on decolonizing efforts to interrogate and transform the institutional structure and epistemological legacies of colonialism. Area studies-based collaborations have also produced a new generation of problem-centered fields and programs. Development studies, studies of women and minorities, cultural studies, global studies, media studies, religious studies, post-colonial studies, cognitive studies, liminality studies, and so on. These have evolved bottom-up in response to social issues, as opposed to the top-down efforts to promote cross-disciplinarity. According to Burke, the problem-solving focus has been much more productive. Development studies grounded in neo-institutional theory have led the way. One example of success is Elinor Ostrom's project on governing the commons, which was awarded the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. The evidence compiled by Ostrom supported the theory that local communities are best at managing their own natural resources as they are the ones who use them, and she argued that the resources should be regulated at a local level rather than a higher centralized authority without a direct access to the resources. However, when bureaucracies adopt these results for their own use, the outcomes may differ significantly. Urban studies hold the record for the number of disciplines involved in its programs in different universities: anthropology, archaeology, architecture, economics, geography, history, literature, politics, and sociology, held together by a concern with major urban problems such as poverty and violence. Due to the visibility of issues of informal settlements, urban studies takes the lead in research on informality and sets the policy agenda on urban development around the globe. Similar to how formal institutions command more attention than informal ones on the subject of solving complex research problems, top-down institutional approaches to interdisciplinarity receive the most coverage. However, it has been complemented and even preceded by bottom-up, informal ways to overcome the fragmentation of knowledge and enable collaborations between scholars from different fields. Burke describes the club established in London by Samuel Johnson and Joshua Reynolds in 1764 as an early example of such cross-fertilization. Members of the club who represented different professions met at a London tavern and discussed matters of shared interest. Similar informal groupings proliferated in London, Boston, and many European cities towards the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, the most famous being the Vienna Circle, History of Ideas Club, Baltimore Radio Club, London, artisan salons, and the like. Blah, blah, blah. Wow, I thought that was a period, but it was a comma. I thought it was a period because the B is capitalized. See, I'm trying to learn to read, but I'm having a little bit of trouble with the way the book reads and the way I want to flow. Let me try that paragraph one more time. Similar to how formal institutions command more attention than informal ones on the subject of solving complex research problems, top-down institutional approaches to interdisciplinarity receive the most coverage. However, it has always been complemented and even preceded by bottom-up, informal ways to overcome the fragmentation of knowledge and enable collaborations between scholars from different fields. Burke describes the club established in London by Samuel Johnson and Joshua Reynolds in 1764 as an early example of such cross-fertilization. Members of the club who represented different professions met at a London tavern and discussed matters of shared interest. Similar informal groupings proliferated in London, Boston, and many European cities toward the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, the most famous being the Vienna Circle, History of Ideas Club, Baltimore, Ratio Club, London, Parisian salons, and the like. Most informal groups had a limited life, from 5 to 15 years. Included a small number of participants with different backgrounds and managed to make significant advances in understanding specific problems as opposed to producing breakthrough scientific discoveries. Their strengths lay in the strong motivation and cognitive diversity of participants, as well as flexibility of interaction free from any formal constraints or obligations. Their weaknesses were limited resources, including time and lack of specific research agenda or a need to deliver. The case of the off-the-record Bilderberg Club, established in 1954, might be an exception here. So it's like this would be a nice study guide to, of course, it's an encyclopedia. Like, there are things that I need to know about if I want to know more. Like I should research where this information comes from, and I have to remind myself to do that. It's just the fact that I need to remind myself to do it. I need to put myself through what it is to remind myself, which is read what we have here. Like, I already know there's an article I would like to read, and that's what I'm thinking about, but then the more I go on and on, I'm passing up the fact that there's an article I would like to read, or that I would like to try to see if I can find. Both top-down and bottom-up efforts to facilitate some interdisciplinary collaboration demonstrate the potential of these groups as well as their limitations. Both require a unifying force that holds the participants together. The format of a high table at Oxbridge colleges generates cross-discipline discussions and exchange of perspectives. However, it is only when the researchers cooperate to address a specific problem that their collaboration becomes sustainable and produces remarkable outcomes. Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson argues that effective collaboration between professionals with diverse backgrounds takes place when they face a challenge that is equally important to all of them but cannot be resolved without others who have complementary skills and knowledge. The network expertise assembled within the Global Informality Project somewhat matches Edmondson's idea of teaming. First, it would not be possible to assemble this global collection of informal practices without the collaboration of researchers across cultures, disciplines, and methods. Hundreds of scholars from all over the globe willing to capture, map, and describe informal practices were united by the challenge of shedding light on informality and its role in the world. Second, most informal practices of problem solving described in this encyclopedia are themselves based on the teaming principle. People face challenges which they are unable to overcome simply by relying on existing top-down formal mechanisms. So they turn to other people with whom they have no formal bonds, but whose help is indispensable. By combining resources, they overcome the challenge and find a solution. Third, the network expertise approach relies on the classics, the strength of the weak ties, activated by the network leadership. Finally, there are wider forces at play that sparked interest in informality studies in the search for alternative solutions to societal problems and sustainability. One example is the Strategic Interactive Map of Informality, set in motion by the World Economic Forum Strategic Intelligence Team. And then in section 2, there's a few figures, but I don't want to try showing the figures or read about the figures if I need to show them. At least not aloud. I feel like, I could see the Global Informality project, or the Global Informality Encyclopedia, the Global Encyclopedia of Informality, as a formal study guide, and sort of guide myself if I want to know about what's going on in it, which I do. It's just that it's huge and it's getting bigger. There's 3 volumes of it. This is of the 3rd volume, and I've only really began looking at the 1st volume. So, just knowing that it's a huge thing that's happening and that it's growing and that I'm already years behind on it. There's probably no way of catching up to it. I need to know more about where it comes from and what my role is in the awareness that it exists, and what if I'm interested in presenting it, or having it present itself to me. But I feel like I've already learned a lot just by being aware of it. I'm aware by only researching BBC, which I was doing in my use of Spotify, but I've kind of stopped using Spotify. I did log in to Spotify because I wanted to see if some of the songs that I was using on Spotify are on YouTube Music, and some of them are not. But I wanted to see if they were, and because I liked some of what I was listening to through Spotify, so I was thinking about starting my Spotify again. But I think I can still go a year without using Spotify. It's not a big deal. It was more about reading the Bible. If I was reading the Bible, or because I was reading the Bible last year, I wasn't listening to music as much. I was still listening to music. But then this year, basically only not listening to music has become listening to music differently. I've started listening to music again. I can't just stop listening to music. I don't know what it is. Especially if I don't intend to read the Bible, I'm going to start listening to music I want to listen to. And that's something I'm aware of. I'm learning about myself, is how much I like listening to music. I need to not be so I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to listen to music, but I like listening to it. I don't want to listen to music as much, but it's what I've been doing. So I'm doing the best I can not to listen to music for the most part. But I have been. I can't just stop listening. But I can start listening to it differently. That's for sure. And I could always listen to it less. And that's happened. So that's good. But anyway, what is informality to me? To me, what informality is, when it comes to ideas that I've been having, or thoughts that I've been thinking that aren't fully formed, they're like informal ideas, like separating boys and girls in school. that would be some kind of experiment for us as a nation to practice. But schools are under state jurisdiction. So the state probably is not going to try to do that. It would take time and effort. They would have to change the names of the schools, and they would have to change the routes of the buses, and parents would have to change their routines and schedules to make sure that boys and girls are going to different schools. And then I don't want to, not that I don't want to begin, I don't know how to begin to think about not having children for a decade or more. I just know that if we go a year without having any newborns, or if we go 10 years without having any newborns, that is, there would not be a elementary, I don't know, it would take 10 or 15 years to have no elementary school students attending, because you have to account for all the babies that there already are. I know when you read the Bible, you find out that there was a slaughtering of all the newborns, and there's all this going on about abortion right now, and people are still having children. People are getting pregnant and having children right now, as far as I know. But if we somehow were to stop having children, stop having newborns, for at least 15 years, there would be no more elementary school. Because we're going to have to teach them if they're coming into the world. But the less there are, the easier they are to teach. And the more willing they're going to be to learn, the less of them there are. But I think it would be nice if we somehow were able to get through to the children that we don't want we want to have children who aren't so aware that there are people who are younger than them that they're communicating with. And we don't want it to get to where that, brothers and sisters are caring for their younger brothers and sisters, right? I would like the family, of course, to be more, I think the term is nuclear, is that right? Nuclear family. Nuclear family is a family unit made up of two parents and their children. It's a common family structure in many cultures and is also known as immediate or elementary family. Typically, the adults in a nuclear family are married. The children in a nuclear family can be biological or adopted. The nuclear family is different from a single-parent family, an extended family, or a family with more than two parents. The term nuclear family uses the word nucleus figuratively, extending its scientific meaning to describe a basic or essential part of a family. Nuclear family and culture. In developed Western societies, the nuclear family has been and remains the norm with various modifications. The HBO documentary series Nuclear Family is about the childhood of director Rai Russo-Young. The series explores how to understand conflict within families and in the world. Other uses of the word nuclear. The word nuclear has many scientific applications, including in astronomy and botany. So, I think we as a nation should try getting back to nuclear family. But, understanding that single parents are resilient. I can have so many thoughts at one time, but these are things that we just cannot do. It can't just happen. It's things that people would all have to be on board about. And what are single people to do? Like, a nuclear family says that it almost says that you have to get married. Like, people have to be married to have children. But in order to do that, if we want people to be married before they have children, because that means they've formally agreed to get married, like that they've gotten married because they want to have children, or that they're, like if you're married and don't want to have children, what are you married for? That is the thing that I'm trying to get at. We have so much freedom, but there's so much informality to freedom. So I have all these ideas, and it's something that I'm trying not to think about. But, we need this national thing to happen, I think. Because where we're going as a nation and where we're coming from is colliding. And, we're keeping so much that we need to know how to be rid of. But we don't want to make anyone be down and out, right? And we don't want to make people feel like they've lost something that they've never had. And again, we're dealing with the age we are, the age of technology, the year we were born, and the year it is. Basically, every year we celebrate the new year. We just celebrated the new year a couple months ago. But every year we celebrate the new year. And almost every month there is a sort of holiday celebration. So every year, the new year, every month, there's a holiday, or it is the month of some sort. And, there are things that we don't need to be, like we as a nation don't need to be learning, that we've learned. And we need to see what we will learn if we try new things, like separating the boys and girls for the hours that they are educating in school. And then there's talk about shortening the school days and shortening the work week, work days, whatever. But I haven't seen it happen yet. And there's not a big enough talking to everyone at once, because not everyone is listening. Everyone has their own things going on, and children are a lot to take care of. We prioritize children because they have more life to live than we do. But I know that adults and elderly people are priority too, but the way that children make us think, when we give the children the freedom, or what we think of as freedom, they can watch whatever they want to, or eat whatever they want to, or, they'll eat what we allow them to eat, and things like that. We need to care more about ourselves and about others before we bring new people into the world. And it's like we as a nation need to mature, but we are not allowed to mature because we are continuing to populate our nation. I mean, I don't have a child. I don't have a legitimate romantic interest. All I do is work. And when I'm not working, I try to do something other than think about work. So let's end the video there, both of them. And try to do something in between this video and my next video.